All right, good evening. Welcome. This is a regularly scheduled city council workshop. Today is December 27th, 2023. And we are at our new location, the Banquet Hearing, Harlow Street. Around the table, we have Councilor Yakabaga, Councilor Leonard, Councilor Haas, Councilor Schaefer, Councilor Dean, Councilor Trumbull, Councilor Fornier, Councilor Fish, and City Manager Rory, and I am Councilor Pelletier. First item on the agenda is follow-up discussion from our city council workshop on December 12th.
Sure, so, as kind of, we had our initial brainstorming session, the council did, as, far as setting priorities for the coming year and the next steps related to the ARPA, so I just wanted to circle back on that. There seemed to be a general consensus, amongst the councilors present about, in essence, designating 2024 as the year of housing. And that would be the priority for the year, especially as housing impacts every aspect of our community. Part of that discussion also talked about how to leverage the city council committee structure to divide and assign tasks associated with that priority and how to engage other stakeholders, which also naturally folded into the ARPA discussion about clearly we still have a few opportunities to potentially partner with Penobscot County, but also being thoughtful that we will use our ARPA money, frankly, any federal money we can get our hands on to continue to advance and invest in housing in our community. So I don't know if you want to, if folks are comfortable with that and ready to move on for the discussion of next steps or next potential steps, I should say.
I'm particularly interested in hearing from Councilor Yakabaga and Councilor Schaefer, since they were unable to attend the workshop. There was broad consensus amongst the group of us who were there, but we didn't want to make any decisions or move forward without giving you a chance to add your feedback and questions and comments.
100% on moving housing forth, absolutely. And the housing and public restrooms, I think that is like, yeah, I'm in agreement with both of those. And I would like to, I don't know if it was part of the discussion, but I'd like to go forward with these discussions and not backwards and re-review past plans and things like that.
Yeah, and the same for me, housing has always been priority, and I mentioned this to Debbie before I left, but for me, housing, it's not only, we're talking about housing across the board, not only for like specific group of people, for everyone. We feel like there's a huge need.
But yeah.
To spend towards housing for every group in our community. So absolutely, I'm all in for this. Public bathrooms. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had many constituents who reached out to me asking about our plan for this, and I connected them with the city manager to maybe to have a committee, and I don't know where we are now at, but I know it's happening, right? It's
on a government operations agenda for next week.
Awesome.
I would.
No, I'm done.
I was gonna say, follow up and say housing across all areas, and I shared this earlier, but truly there's, rents are being raised indiscriminately in some cases, and I had somebody reach out to me, a high school friend, who said that his landlord was raising the rent by like 20%, and his reason was because Bangor City Council is gonna do rent control. And I said, well, we're not, it's not even on the table. I don't think we even have the numbers for it. So it's not gonna happen. And I said, but I thought you lived in Herman. He said, I do. That's why I'm telling you, because he thought it was so ridiculous that his landlord in Herman was using the Bangor City, like we have no control over Herman. Even if we did have policies like that, none of our policies impact the Herman rental market. And so but people are saying, I can raise the rent, so I will, basically. And I think it's important that we are talking about not just for home buyers, also renters, tenants, affordable housing, low-income housing, housing the unhoused, having accessible housing for aging seniors and people who want to maybe not age in place in the home they've been in, but age in the city they've been in, all of those things. So housing across the board, not just, not solely for those who are currently unhoused.
So given that, one of the things I had asked the city manager was, could we start to think about for each of our standing committees, how might we, over the next year, move some housing priorities forward? So what could finance committee do this year? What could B&ED do? What could GovOps do? I asked her if she would be willing to provide us with a starting point for some discussion and some ideas.
Clearly, if we're gonna focus on housing, a lot of that work falls to the Business and Economic Development Committee, especially as it comes from a policy perspective. So looking in zoning and ordinances that may be, a barrier to housing, that would go through Business and Economic Development. We had already begun the process of developing a tax increment financing and a credit enhancement policy. But some of that policy could create a differential treatment for housing. So perhaps you'd be willing to give some amount of a credit enhancement agreement for housing, depending on the income level that the housing would be tied to. So you have some opportunities to look at that policy and how you help from housing in that perspective. Typically, tax increment financing and credit enhancement agreements, that used to be, it started off as a wholly economic development tool, and it was really geared toward businesses. And really, a lot of it came about from the mill communities. You would have a mill that needed, a paper mill that needed to replace a $20 million piece of equipment. But the tax implications from doing that were so substantial, it created a rub. So the tax increment financing was a way to kind of make it not as much of a nugget, if you will, to get over and still be able to continue to invest. But it's expanded beyond just that. I mean, we've done it with General Electric was our first tip. And it was an expansion of the manufacturing facilities. So housing is certainly something we have done and something we could look at. We also are a community development block grant entitlement community, which means we get an allocation of CDBG funds directly from the federal government, and we get to determine how we're going to allocate those funds. We could, our new community development block grant officer is actually looking at how we might be able to support multifamily improvements, multifamily building improvements, something we haven't done a lot with. Kind of along the same line, there's the rental registry and pilot program. She was kind of looking at that pilot program piece too. The housing plan consultant, I think, on your business and economic development agenda next week, you will have an item to talk about whether or not you want a contract for housing production plan. So that's on for your agenda next week. We also have identified a handful of city properties that are owned, where we could, in essence, drive the development of housing. And there's an opportunity to potentially allocate your ARPA funds to make some investment in the infrastructure to help buy down the development costs, because what we do here is the development costs, those upfront pre-construction, they're part of the project, but that's kind of a difficult thing sometimes for banks to kind of wrap their lending around. So if we could build out the infrastructure and pay for that, it gives us just another opportunity to entice the kind of development that we'd like to. We only have a handful of parcels that are large enough to be really substantial, but we do have, obviously, we've got the properties that we've just taken possession of that were vacant and placarded. So we also have some opportunities to one-off. So through finance committee,
Before we move on,
yep,
do you have
sorry.
a comment, Councilor Foss?
I did. I like all of what's under here.
Mhm.
I think and we talked about this in our goals and discussion, but that whole piece about the infrastructure is so important.
Yeah.
Because our infrastructure is at best in bad shape in some places. So
Mhm.
by doing this, we won't necessarily not be moving forward, not be having economic development if we keep our eye on the fact that every place should be looked at for the structure to make sure it's there. And I like these because they're things that are doable. There's not a thing on here that makes it feel like it's pie in the sky and it's gonna take 25 years to finish. And that was I think that's important. It is to me that we can actually finish some projects that are meaningful to the citizens. that we haven't been able to do because of other things. So it frees us up to do that. And I think everybody's input, actually, looking through this, I can almost see everybody's input in here from that discussion at the goal setting. So, and that's important. So thank you.
I have a question about zoning and ordinance reviews. Do we, at what point in the year do we, appoint people to the planning board? Do we have people coming up this year? How does that
Yep,
process?
so you have new members whose terms will begin in January.
They'll begin in January.
Yeah, you've already appointed the
Thank you.
members.
Okay.
On the next page under Finance Committee, we currently have 3 RFPs out that will be coming back before Finance Committee that are related in essence to housing. We have the pre-approved building plan architectural services as part of the fiscal year 24 budget. The city council funded, the city paying for basically building plans. So what we're gonna do is we're working to identify a firm and we're gonna work with that firm and say, we want you to draw, I mean, if you think about it, used to be historically, it was the Bangor box. If you had a house, it was the Bangor box. So we may come up with a Bangor multi-unit, a Bangor accessory dwelling unit, or a Bangor 2-unit. And ask somebody to do all of the complete construction drawings. And have them available so that if somebody walks into our community and says, I wanna do a 2-unit, and we can say, here you go. You don't have to pay for the plans. They're all pre-approved. You don't have to go through a plan review and all of that. So hopefully that's also another way to entice development in the community. The short-term rental monitoring and compliance, that RFP is due January 3rd. That will come back through finance. And then we still have a parcel of property that we own that we've been trying to get redeveloped at 324 Union Street, and that RFP is due back on January 10th. And then, historically, what has happened is, as I said, we have acquired 4 properties recently, is usually the recommendations as to how we're gonna dispose of those properties comes back through finance. The properties may be either something that may not be able to be salvaged, so we may come back and recommend we demolish them. We may recommend that, hey, we may be able to use community development block grant funds and turn this into a great single-family home for a qualified family. Or we may talk to Habitat for Humanity and say, hey, is this a house that works for you? So we have several different options that we could pursue with city acquired properties. Government Operations Committee, the city solicitor will continue to provide regular updates on the vacant and placarded properties and the registry updates, changes that have been recently put in place. April of 2024, kind of looking at some energy efficiency incentives. Lots of times the incentives offered by Efficiency Maine are geared toward not a multi-unit. We know that we have a number of multi-units that perhaps could benefit, so maybe the city needs to augment it in some way. So be looking at that. And as I said, the public restrooms discussion is on your agenda for next week at Government Ops. Infrastructure Committee, and I think this is what Councilor Haas was referring to, is looking at our wastewater treatment plant infrastructure investment opportunities. So, for example, I know we have a pump station that is a current pinch point. I know that there is vacant land in that area that may be potentially redeveloped at some point. It's one of the areas that we have larger tracts. Should we consider replacing that pump station so that that doesn't become a barrier to future development? We also are going to be looking at some capacity studies. So we have all kinds of sewer subsets, is looking at the capacity across our subsets. So that's the outline of what I came up with based on our session. And to Councilor Haas' point as well, I think it's something that we have these are sort of very near term, so it gives us the opportunity to add the what's next. So in March, we can say, okay, what's next? You know, check, what's next? And then we can kind of set ourselves up for forward progress.
I have a question, please. So about energy efficiency incentives. So this is different from CDBG
It could be,
program. It could be through them.
it could be CDBG. It could be Maybe there is some, money through Efficiency Maine
Okay,
that we could maybe supplement
Mhm.
or add to. I will tell you that I think it was, can't remember how many years ago, we had the, Bangor rebate. We did a rebate for all single-family homeowners. We matched, if you will,
Mhm.
the rebate from Efficiency Maine.
Okay.
But we limited it to single-family households. And we know we have a lot of multi-units, so can we help improve the quality of our multi-units and the comfort of our multi-units as well?
Other thoughts, questions? Good start.
All right. I also didn't know if you wanted to kind of start with almost a priority statement, if you will. And guess what I did, Counselor Norman? You know what I used?
ChatGPT.
Yes, I did. Because it's really helpful for things like this. You have to go and edit it, but what I did was just put together a sample priority statement for the coming year. That you've identified housing as your top priority. It's your goal being to increase the opportunities for all residents to have access to quality housing that meets their needs. Housing is a critical component of our community's well-being and economic vitality. By prioritizing housing, we aim to create a more vibrant and inclusive community where everyone can thrive. And then I just kind of added some additional things as well, but I just throw that out there in case that's something to always, I think Council Chair Pelletier said, you know, if we have that front of mind at every meeting. And so this just felt like a way to put it front of mind.
I have already received requests from media about when are you gonna talk about your priorities for the year? So if we can all use this as a starting point for those conversations, I think that will be helpful.
Okay.
What did we not capture in this priority statement? What should we add or amend? Any thoughts?
Are we talking temporary housing and permanent housing when we are discussing this, or is it mostly permanent housing?
Temporary, do you mean like transitional housing?
Like,
Um,
what we already have here, what we could maybe utilize faster and more efficiently while we're deciding what we can build.
I see.
I mean, that, not to interrupt, but that's what I envisioned through our housing projects. We can't really incorporate a housing strategy unless we have transitional housing, because there are people that are in dire need and get off the streets right now. So whatever facilities that we have, whether it's commercial properties or not, we need to make use with every asset that we have. So just my own perspective, but we have to talk about transitional housing.
And we do, I'm not sure if you're aware, because it happened before you got here, but we do have a project in the works, the Pine Tree Inn, that is sort of stuck in stasis right now unless the city manager has an update, but it's would be providing 41 units of transitional housing that we're just waiting for contracts to be signed so that that work can be
And it's
undertaken.
actually 41 units of public supported housing. So not even, so the transitional housing, for example, that exists at the Hope House, as part of the Hope House operation, is meant to, so an individual who may be coming from a shelter setting, getting an individual acclimated to being in their own setting and preparing them to be, you know, moving into their own permanent housing and to be successful. So that's typically what's referred to as transitional housing. Permanent supportive housing is recognizing that there are individuals in our community who are gonna need some level of support permanently. It may not, it's not live-in care by any stretch of the imagination, but it is some assistance with what I will call, you know, permanent housing. But it's not transitional and it's not. So those are the 41 units that we're waiting to come online.
Councilor Akabaka?
So when we talk about reduced homelessness, can we prioritize or highlight supporting those who are not chronically homeless so that we like we know supporting those, at least we have a more positive outcome. And I'm talking about supporting everyone who's unhoused, but specifically those who are not chronically unhoused. Those like who can, if you put them in transitional housing, they can succeed. They with the support, with the support system. I feel it's important to do that because maybe the work we did with the unhoused individuals, I think maybe, I don't want to say we failed in some areas, but where it was not successful, I feel it's with those who were more chronically unhoused, and it was harder for them maybe to, to adjust to the new environment, being housed, even with the services.
So, even with the HUD was here with us, what they said is, you will always have unhoused individuals. You will never successfully house everyone who is unhoused. They said there were just folks that it's not going to work for. I'm not putting a number on that. I'm not saying that may be potentially what happened with anybody there, but we have always had unhoused in our community, and we always will have unhoused in our community. But I agree that ensuring that people have access to the supports that they need, and I can tell you that some of those that weren't successful in their housing have remained connected to the supports, which to me is a win. I'm like, okay, that's a win. So we need to be thankful for the wins.
Yeah, we know that some unhoused individuals, they fall into being unhoused, and if we catch those before it's too long for them being unhoused, I feel that's where maybe we'll be more successful.
Yeah, and to go off on Dina's point, I think it's important for us to recognize methods that have already been successful to reducing homelessness, such as housing first models. I think it's important to stress tactics that have been implemented and have been proven to be successful. I recognize that we can't do an operation and scale it to the entire state. That's obviously not in our purview. But what we can do is be pioneers in this industry and try to set up a system so that those who aren't chronically homeless, that want to get integrated back into society, we've already established a housing parameter so that if these individuals, if and when they do fall off the wagon, or if they come into some sort of economic crisis in their life, that they're not going to revert back to sleeping in a tent on the street. They already have the communications and the connections to get back into immediate housing, to get back into that plan, whether it's less than 6 months or more than 6 months to get back into society. And to go off on that point, one thing that I would actually add to this, if everyone's accepting of this, is investing in professional development for citizens, whether they are homeless ones that are trying to get back into the economy, or if they're young entrepreneurs who are trying to get a better career for themselves, but still want to live here in Bangor. I think working with the Innovation Center to create a young person's outreach program to get them integrated into whether it's online entrepreneurial businesses or developing their artificial intelligence skills. I think creating a community of innovators, teaching future entrepreneurs and innovators is going to help maintain a young population to stay here in Bangor. And a good way to start such a program is to help those who are already struggling to get a job in this in these hard economic times right now. So that's something that I would like to see, but obviously I'd like to hear what everyone else has to say on professional development.
Counselor Schaefer?
Not speaking to that, but just in general, making sure that we have funds for diversion, which I know we've used some ARPA funds, or we've used something from somewhere for diversion where somebody's on the verge of becoming homeless, and maybe it's the light bill, the last $50 or whatever, and making sure that we also have an emphasis on diversion to prevent people from becoming homeless.
Yep, there was some diversion. So Bangor Area Homeless Shelter had asked for a diversion money through ARPA. And that funding went over through CDBG. And I will say that every day, the City of Bangor Public Health engages in diversion. And we engage today with an individual in the lobby who had to throw out all of their food and was very upset, was not a SNAP benefit recipient, had called the state and nobody was calling them back, and we worked to get them to GA. So we diverted, in essence, perhaps not from homelessness, but from hunger. So we divert every day.
Councilor Bornier?
Just to address professional development, I think there are enough sources within the community already. There's SCORE. There is the organization that works out of Penkwas here. I can't remember the name of the program. I know the guy because I've been down here trying to help young entrepreneurs.
Not the mainstream thing,
No, it's the other one, but, Eastern Maine Development, they have their own set of people that also help, as well as, CEI, Coastal Enterprises. They're right up here on the hill, on Cumberland. So I think there's enough of those resources available. to help us all.
Councilor House?
I was just similar to what you just said. I think that we have had so many different things pop up to socially help people, that when we started focusing on the housing piece, there are other groups out there that are doing workforce development. They're getting involved with other people. And I believe that when people go to the city for resources, there's a lot of those people that maybe they don't say, hey, I do professional development, but in a lot of ways they do. They may not put it under professional development heading, but I think they're pointing people in the right direction. And to me, that's what we need. There's two ways to look at professional development. If you're looking at setting up classrooms and having something like that, I'm not sure that that's what would fit into what we're doing here. But just getting down and talking to the people and getting them to the resources they need, that is helping them develop personally, hopefully professionally. Some of them have been able to go and get jobs that they couldn't get before. And it's helping with the stigmatism of not everybody that's houseless is not employable or not educatable, or say that 3 times fast. So I think we're already doing that on some level, other than just having a heading that says professional development. I just don't want us to, I'm not saying we should put it aside, but I don't want us to veer from what we have here, that we were all so in favor of, to really start with this homeless, the housing and for everybody. That's gonna take a lot, and I think we're of the mindset to do it, So I just hope it wouldn't take us in another direction.
Councilor Fish?
I think that, the priority statement, encompasses a lot of what we discussed before, as Councilor Hawes said. I think we have, 33,000 residents in housing is a concern for a lot of them, whether they're young people trying to find the apartment, just getting their jobs, or people with families trying to afford, daycare and, the cost of living. And people of all spectrums of our city, housing and rental and mortgages and interest rates and expenses in general are a great concern. And when we visited the library last week, I was really surprised when they told us they have over 30 resources to help them with their unsheltered people that they have kind of organized depending upon the need of the people that they're working with. And so I think that even the unhoused people, I think, fall within these parameters of our priorities. We even say reduce homelessness. So I think that this stays, the statement as it is, pretty much stays with our objectives, and that, they also create a lot of flexibility as we may want to, as we go down this road and find we need to, tweak this a little bit. But, I agree, we Homelessness, unsheltered people are vulnerable. They're a concern for all of us. But I think, the majority of the Bangor residents are also, their needs are a concern.
Councillor Leonard?
I'm fine with not including professional development into the priority statement. I do want to stress, though, that was one of the two major economic pieces that was taken away from the economic study that the city just went under. And one of those priorities was developing our Gen Z workforce. And so whether we collaborate more with these established organizations to either coordinate with them with manpower or funding or something like that, I'm completely fine with that. But I do want to stress, we have to pay attention to young people and attracting them to Bangor and making sure they stay in Bangor, because if we don't work on this right now, we're going to have many more economic problems as we start to have more and more people reaching the retirement age, and we have less and less of a labor force here. So that's my biggest concern, but I understand that's not something we can solve in a year or even 5 years, but that is a concern I have, that we really need to think outside the box to develop.
Okay, last item.
Last item is, there were just some other bits and pieces that have come up even in this short period of time. So I just wanted to kind of throw them out there and say these are certainly things we can schedule to come back and have a conversation about. I gathered this one is collaborative initiatives. There's been talks about, liaison or legislative committees and relationships with other communities. So I just wanted to kind of put that in there to see. The Dorothea Dix update, I think a couple of counselors had heard from some state legislators. I'm hoping that at this point, it does look like we are going to be rescheduling the legislative session for January 22nd, which is a Monday. And I know Senator Baldacci may have some update beyond what I do from Dorothea Dix. And I believe Representative Perry had some history with it 15 years ago. So just kind of a good way. And I will say that they have only had one steering committee meeting so far. The next one is supposedly next Wednesday. Artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, Councillor Leonard references on this quite often. Councillor Schaefer was all excited about, yes, we shouldn't make all those people have our Bangor zip code. So I don't know what that involved, but throwing it out there.
Our zip code, Herman can get their own.
Councillor Trumbull, referred to Northern Light, I guess, is looking at doing away with their own corporators. And then just outreach and messaging to businesses and residents to kind of, that's kind of the takeaways I had for other items at this point to come back and discuss. And I can work with the council chair as to where we can put these all back through, but.
Can we give the folks who weren't at the commissioners meeting an update on some of the next steps with them, please?
I think you.
I just had a quick thing. In regards to AI,
Yeah.
I would love to actually try to set up, I don't know if they're gonna be able to do this, but Penobscot County dispatchers have started utilizing Amazon's artificial intelligence to help with their dispatch work, and it's heavily reduced their workload, especially considering they have very few dispatch workers. I'd be very interested in just trying to learn from that department to see what has worked from them, what have been some challenges, and to see if that's something that we can even incorporate into our own system as well, or something akin to that. There's a lot of things that AI can be used to help out through the administrative functions of the city, and that's one area that I'm really paying close attention to, because it seems to be heavily reducing their workload burdens. And there's in regards to zip codes, actually, this might be a bit out there. I know there are some communities like Howland in the north, they're starting regionalization efforts up there. I don't know where, I barely even thought about this myself, but if Bangor were inclined to have a conversation about regionalization in our own area, that might also help on a multitude of things while also addressing some of the issues related to zip code. But I just figured I might as well bring that up as a topic if we ever want to talk about regionalization.
You mean annexing other towns? What do you mean? It's an honest question. I'm not sure. what
Yeah,
you-
so effectively, like what they're doing in Howland right now is they have their own fire departments and police departments, and a lot of their force is just very stretched thin, and it puts a lot of pressure onto the county sheriff's office as well. And so one of the things that regionalization can do is better organize all these municipalities to have more organized access to emergency uses and other municipal services as well.
Got it.
There's still a lot more that I need to read on as well, because I don't really know where I fall in, but that's a huge conversation that we might want to have with the county commissioners as well, because they seem to be pretty gung ho on the project as well.
Okay,
You know, it was missing on the agenda, and if this feels like the right place, do you want this Penobscot County Commissioners as we finish this workshop item? Or do you want it under manager updates, which I forgot to put on the weekly schedule?
either place,
Okay,
go for
all right, so, the, Council Chair Pelletier and, Council Fournier, and I attended the County Commissioners meeting last Tuesday. I believe Councilor Tremble was perhaps dealing with some power outages and in some businesses is my guess. So this was kind of a follow-up to the partnership opportunities. The city itself had suggested, for example, the allocation to Heart of Maine United Way was contingent upon a matching ask from Penobscot County. While the council did not specifically ask, I was kind of pushing and said, hey, Wellspring is doing a project and a detox center and step and, intermediary beds is really, a regional need. Perhaps you would all consider that. They had a couple of requests from us, they believe, for part of a generator for a nursing home. They also had a request from the youth shelter. Not quite clear why the youth shelter didn't apply to anybody, but they didn't. And I think, was there one more that they were interested in? Pardon me?
Those are the four.
Those were the four. So we kind of talked about each of our priorities and they said, well, we'll sit together and we'll come forward and make a recommendation. So hopefully we'll hear something on that and then come before the council for your final action, because it's difficult with two counselors. They did a nice tap dance, not talking for you all, but trying to be reflective of everything that was shared.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think that's it on the
All right.
agenda.
Well, I have some updates if I may.
Please.
So one request, we had a request from Wabanaki Public Health. They'd like a letter of support from the city, to support a $50,000 grant application, to the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association. And it would be to support their becoming more visible, changing the perception of Wabanaki culture in Maine. It would be used to fund some signage in the Wabanaki Youth and Culture Center so that the signage is both in English and the Wabanaki languages, as well as to provide some training costs and registration for Indigenous Maine guides, food handling, management training and certifications. I didn't think there would be any concerns by the council, but we don't do letters of support without having, I'm gonna take that as no concern. Okay. My only other manager update is a bit of a doozy, last week's storm. So we are doing kind of a couple of things. As you saw, the federal government has said, yes, we can go ahead and look at whether or not we meet the criteria for qualifying for federal assistance. So obviously city staff is in the process of compiling all the information we have, and we'll combine that and turn it over to see if that helps cross the threshold where we may receive reimbursement. Fortunately or unfortunately, all of us have now been through this once before where we've had to track storm debris, so we're a little bit better prepared. About, you have to track where all the trees came from and where, so it's a whole process, but. We knew it was likely coming, so we've been doing that right along. The second part of that work is, we have, some relationship with Versant, and let's just say we expanded upon our relationship with Versant last week. I know a lot of people were frustrated about the phrasing that was going out. Things are under investigation. We're determining what's next. There really wasn't any clear answers. I think especially that first day, I don't believe anybody felt they saw a Versant truck in town. And there's a lot that happened. There was a lot of damage to transmission lines. Transmission lines have to be rebuilt in order to provide the service to the substations. But we also know that they continued with that. And I know that they were trying to climb on top of it. They had a lot more damage than they had anticipated. They had an influx of out-of-state crews, but if you're not kind of well positioned for that, it doesn't feel very smooth. They recognize that. Obviously, they're doing their own internal debrief and they've been very open and, we've said to them, we need to have a conversation after you have your debrief and we can help you. And so we're gonna take this as a good opportunity to do that, so.
Councilor Trumbo?
Just a couple of things. First, I think the city did a great job. Because while everybody's dealing with this city, from the city manager, the fire chief, everybody's dealing with the power out at their own house too. So then they come to work and deal with it all day. It was a stressful week for everybody. So that said, I agree with what you said. We need to have, it might even involve the PUC because I think going forward, they say, oh, we're looking at the largest power hours. We're the largest municipality in the
Correct.
Versant service area. And we're the service center. So even if we've got an area that has 1,000 out and they've got an area with 2,000 out, it might be more critical to angle up and going because it's the businesses, it's the people that service these other areas. So you need to look at how they're responding and then how they communicate. Because I mean, I know the linemen and everybody else, they were doing a great job, but how they respond to the people when you're in the dark and then they keep you in the dark, it compounds the problem. So I think they need to be more, they need a better communications and that's all. I mean, when they're telling people that calling in, oh, it's under investigation and the people that are out of power, they're calling in, they say, oh, your power's back off for 10 hours when it's never been turned back on. So, and when the the government relations person is giving state reps more information than they're giving the city, it's very frustrating. So I think they really need to, they're better than they were for that October storm a few years ago, but they're not where they need to be.
Yep.
And the other thing, as far as the city side, when that October storm happened like 7 or 8 years ago, we had a new person in the electrical division and they set up some portable generators at
Yep.
traffic lights. I think we had they cut the chain and stole it, but that worked well and we didn't do it this time.
Yes, we did.
Well, we didn't do it, I didn't see it many
Yep.
places, but
Yep.
we could have done more, I think.
Yeah,
Uh,
I know. Yeah, so what you've seen also is a lot of our traffic signals actually stayed on.
Yeah.
So the traffic signal stayed on because as we're upgrading, we're putting the battery backups in them
Mhm.
so that we don't have that.
Yeah. Like
So we
Hammond-
only had,
Union and Hammond, I think. has
right,
that.
so we only had 2 portable generators left
Okay,
and we did deploy
Yeah.
them. But then we only had like 2 sets of the stop signs on a stick, I'm gonna call them. So, because the stop signs on the stick are what we ended up with
Yeah.
at Hammond and Union.
yeah.
Yeah, so that was
Councilor Schaefer?
Just echoing a lot of what Dan said and, the communications, I mean, Versant sure knew how to find my cell phone when they wanted me to vote a certain way, but when the power went out, they had no communication from them. And it wasn't just like I know people in your neighborhood, Dan, had called in, no, your power's on. They're looking at it, no, it's not. But it happened on the west side
Yeah.
too, that people were calling and saying, no, the power and one of them, she actually went down the street and found a truck at the other end of the street, said, are we on your list? No, I thought you were up. No, we're not. And that's how they got it, was by physically stalking a person and contractor. So communication, huge piece, but also the city. One of my friends had a tree drop right across on Norway Road, actually, where the traffic is 26 miles an hour. Had a tree drop right across her driveway, pulled down the lines and everything, and she's texting me and I'm like, I don't know, like, like put in the Go Bangor app, but I'm not sure if it'll count because it's not, I don't know that it's our tree, but I don't know. Nope. Didn't matter. They were there that night, cut the tree up, and it was one of those big old Norway Road trees. And so that if there was an emergency, she would have been able to get in and out of her house, and she was blown away that it was just taken care of by the city. So, and so even I, little cynic Schaefer over here was like, I don't know that we're gonna do that for you, but good, give it a try.
Good for you.
I don't think I have that kind of pull, but it was taken care of. And so, and I saw that, even today, I saw them on the
Yep.
corner of, at, Hersey and
Person
Place,
placed it, that was a
taking
mess.
care of that, so I think that the city really needs to be commended for their response. But I would also agree that people were asking me like, why does the senator have information and you don't? I'm like, I'm giving you the best information that I have, and this is what I have. And so the city leadership needs to have current information regularly.
We perhaps had some of those conversations.
And yeah, good.
Councilor Fournier?
Just gonna echo both of your comments. And there really needs to be an incredible amount of increased communication with persons and the city. And there was a house across the street from me on Webster. There was a tree that landed on the house. I went out and I said, make sure you call Public Works because it's on the Esplanade. They did, and Public Works was there. The tree was off the house the next day, and I was impressed.
Yep.
The city did a really good job there.
Councilor Leonard?
One thing I do want to address is, and this will definitely go outside the scope of like what are really the city's responsibilities, but I think these storms are going to become more of a regular occurrence just because of the impacts of climate change. And so what we really need to address is these exposed power lines that fall over onto highways and roads. Not only is this bad for our economy, but it's also incredibly dangerous as well. We can't solve this as a city because this would be a huge project that would go underway. It would have to be done across the entire state, but we really need to have a conversation about heavily more protected power lines, whether they be underground or making sure the foundation of these poles are well maintained and there are no trees in the vicinity to them. Obviously, we can't do much about the interpersonal neighborhoods that have power lines up, that would be a huge project to be undertaken, but we really need to make sure that the grid is more secure than it is right now. Our population is only going to further increase the more services and the more that we grow as a community. And as we grow more as a community, we need to make sure that storms like this, when they do occur, they're not going to be as heavily impacting the city as much as they do right now. So that's really my only takeaway, is to make sure that we are, whether working with some legislators to come up with some type of bills to invest into our grid, not just for Bangor, but just all across the state, would be super helpful, but to also potentially include Versant and some of these other companies to make sure that they are also getting their word involved when conducting such changes to our infrastructure. Because rightly so, there were a lot of people that were just heavily impacted, and we need to make sure that this is that this happens less and less, but I fear it's going to happen more and more as the years come on.
Other updates?
Done.
We are adjourned with,
Oh, like 10 minutes to spare.
Just